Today's lesson is about the subjunctive and using the subjunctive in Latin. To begin with, we're going to talk about the sequence of tenses. In Latin, the subjunctives have to correlate with the indicative verbs with which we place them. This is determined by the tenses of the verbs, and it will change the tense in which we translate the subjunctive. What I mean by that is this: things that happen in the present or in the future, very rarely will we use the future perfect as a part of one of these clauses where the subjunctive is present. So if we use present or future tenses, the subjunctive tense that we have to use is the present or the perfect. Now, we're not dealing with these today, but just to keep that in mind, if the indicative verb is in the present or the future tense, then the subjunctive verb will have to be in the present or the perfect tense. To translate the subjunctive, just because it's present tense doesn't mean that we're going to translate it into the present tense. You're going to translate it into the same time or after the main verb. So if you think of it like this, if the main verb is in the present, right here, it's in the present, then anything that happens after the present or the present tense itself, we can translate using the present subjunctive. So if I have a present tense, I am loved, and I have a subjunctive in the present tense, I would have I am loved when I go home, or I could even have after when I should go home, or when I do go home in the future. A little bit confusing, but not terrible. When we use the perfect subjunctive, this should make a little bit more sense here. And we have a present indicative. Then this perfect subjunctive will be translated as any tense that happens before the present. So you're talking about imperfect tense, you're talking about pluperfect tense or perfect tense that you can translate this subjunctive into if we have a present tense main verb and we have a perfect tense subjunctive verb. So think of the subjunctive as the tense doesn't really give it a time in which it happens specifically. What it does is it tells you what time the verb, the subjunctive verb, happens in correlation with the main verb. So if you use a subjunctive in the present tense, then the subjunctive is happening at the same time or after the main verb tense. If you use a perfect subjunctive, then it's happening before the indicative verb. All right, today what we're actually dealing with is we're dealing with the imperfect and pluperfect subjunctives. They work the same way. The only difference with the sequence of tenses here is these are actions that are in the past. Now, we will use all three of these in our subordinate clauses when we're using subjunctive verbs to form these subordinate clauses. If I have a perfect tense, a pluperfect tense, or an imperfect tense main verb, indicative tense verb, then I have to use one of these two subjunctive tenses. And again, depending on when that subjunctive happens, if that subjunctive verb is happening at the same time or after the indicative tense, then we use the imperfect tense of the subjunctive. If that action of the subjunctive happened before the indicative tense, then we would use the pluperfect. Sequence of tense will come along. The more that we use it, you'll kind of understand, and I'll try to explain it a little better as we go on. All right, going to subjunctive forms and how they happen. If you look here, we have a tense timeline. And I just talked about this sequence of tenses. All of these guys over here, pluperfect, the perfect, and imperfect indicatives, will take the pluperfect or the imperfect subjunctive. These guys over here are going to take the perfect or present subjunctives. Based on this, same time and after is what we're dealing with. If you can remember that, same time and after is what the imperfect tense in the subjunctive is going to be translated as. So if my indicative verb is perfect, and I use the imperfect, I can use any of the tenses that are at the same time or after. If I use the pluperfect, I can only use one, which is back here. If I use the imperfect indicative, then I could use, for the pluperfect subjunctive, I could translate it either as pluperfect or as perfect. Again, I'll explain that a little better when we get into some of the sentences. Forming the pluperfect subjunctive. I'm going to give you the long way, and then I'm going to give you the short way. The long way is explaining exactly how it gets to the pluperfect subjunctive. The short way is just kind of a shortcut to help you remember. If you remember when we had adjectives and adverbs, we used the double S to make something superlative. In other words, as far back as big or as small as something could get, we use the ISS. We're going to do the same thing with the subjunctive. If you think of this timeline right here, the furthest back I can go is pluperfect. The subjunctive tense then, for the pluperfect subjunctive, is going to use this ISS, this superlative form. It's the furthest back you can go. Furthest, EST, superlative. So think of it that way. Since the verb will be forming something from the perfect system, remember, perfect system includes the perfect, the pluperfect, the future perfect. We're going to use the perfect stem, or the third principal part, to form the word. Okay, here's my four principal parts of almo. We have the first person singular, we have the present infinitive, we have the perfect first person, and then we have the perfect passive participle. We form stems using these two, present stem, perfect stem. Taking the I off of the third principal part, because if you remember, E is the it, imus istis erant. E, the letter I, is the first person indicator of the perfect tense. So if I take that off, that leaves me with the perfect stem amav. So if I take the I off of amawi, which is right here, that third principal part, that leaves me with amav, which is our perfect stem. Okay, we're going to remember that I is that first person singular indicator. That's why I'm taking that I off there. Now, in order to create the pluperfect subjunctive, I'm just going to add the ISSE plus one of our present system personal endings. You say, well, why aren't we going to use the perfect system endings? Remember, after we got through that perfect tense, all of the other perfect systems, pluperfect and future perfect, we use the OMST MUST sign. So that's nothing that we're not used to. So we're going to use these personal endings right here to add to the word that we end up with. So we take the I off of amawi, we get amav. We add ISSE, that gives us amawisi, which, by the way, for our shortcut later, remember that this is also the perfect infinitive. And then we're going to add our personal ending, which in this case we're going to have first person singular, amawism. This is the pluperfect subjunctive form in the first person and singular. The easiest way to remember the pluperfect subjunctive is that it is the perfect infinitive, amawisi, plus a personal ending. That's it. That's the shortcut. So you can go through this entire process here. You can go through this entire process, or you can just say, "Oh, okay, I know what the perfect infinitive is, amawisi, and I'm going to add an ending." And the reason it's important that you try to use this shortcut is because the imperfect subjunctive uses the present infinitive to do the same thing. Okay, we have two infinitives here. We have amari and we have amawisi. If we take amawisi and we add mst musti, we have the pluperfect subjunctive. The imperfect subjunctive, much easier. There's no long way to get to it. You're simply going to take the second principal part, amari, and you're going to add mst musti surnat. So I'm going to take amari, that's my present stem, right? We're using present stem for the imperfect subjunctive, and we're just adding the personal ending. Amar, M. Amare, M. So we have amar. Again, you can see the infinitive inside of it. So both of these, the pluperfect and the imperfect subjunctive, are fairly easy to form if you can remember that they're just infinitives. They're just infinitives with an ending. Okay, let's get a little deeper here. How do we use the subjunctive? Okay, coach, I know how to form them. I don't know what it does, though. Well, as a general rule, the subjunctive is used to show some kind of doubt. We're not sure something happened. We're not sure something might happen. But there are other things that we can use, and I think that's what this chapter is focusing on. We're going to focus on cum clause and also the indirect question. But as a general rule, the subjunctive adds doubt to a statement. What is a cum clause? A cum clause is used in correlation with another verb to express a condition that the conditions that were involved with the action of the main verb. It is also introduced by the word cum. You're going to have that word cum every time you have a cum clause. As you can see in this sentence, we have the introduction of cum. Then we have what kind of subjunctive there? We have a perfect infinitive plus T. Perfect plus a personal ending equals the pluperfect subjunctive. Then we have mater gravis est. Here we have what tense? We have a perfect tense with a pluperfect subjunctive. Going back to our sequence of tenses, does that match? Let's see. Let me erase this real quick to get back to this. We had a perfect verb, main verb, gravis est, and then we had a pluperfect subjunctive. That fits. They match. So we're good. So this follows our sequence of tenses. When we use the pluperfect, remember that the tense of the main verb, which in this case is perfect, this action occurs in the perfect tense. That means that whatever happens in this cum clause has to happen in a tense before perfect. There's only one tense before the perfect tense, and that's the pluperfect tense. So when I translate cum domum vinescit, I have to use the pluperfect tense, which is, of course, dad came. When dad had came home, I'm missing dad in that sentence. It really should be cum pater domum vinescit. Let's go ahead and add that. Good, sorry about that. Should have pater in there. All right, now we're good. Now we're good. When dad had came home, it's had came because the pluperfect is being used in the subjunctive. It happens before the main clause, which is in the perfect. When dad had came home, mother rejoiced. So the indicative is just mother rejoiced. That is a normal way to translate the indicative half of the sentence. Subjunctive will not affect the indicative part of the sentence. It is related to the indicative verb based on time that before or time after or time the same time, depending on which subjunctive I use. If I use the pluperfect subjunctive, it is before the action in the main clause. So that's why I'm using the pluperfect had came here. If you really want to get into it, you can use the pluperfect tense every single time that you have a pluperfect subjunctive, and it's always going to be right. So if you get confused by that, just always translate the pluperfect subjunctive as pluperfect tense, and you're okay. If you want to get more technical with it, that's whenever you can decide which tense before the main verb you want to use. This clause explains the reason that this is a cum clause is it explains the cause that the main action, what caused the main action to occur. Dad came home, and because of that, mom rejoiced. So with a cum clause, I have two choices. I can either have a temporal relationship, or I can have a causal relationship with the main verb. I can say when dad had come home, mom rejoiced. Or I could say because dad had come home, mom rejoiced. So I can use either cause or time. I can say after dad had come home, before dad had come home, based on my context, I can use time, or I can say because Dad came home, since Dad came home, to make it causal. The other way that we use the subjunctive is with the indirect question. If I'm going to repeat a question word for word, what somebody says, I'm obviously just going to use quotation marks. He asked, quote, this, this, and this. If I'm going to paraphrase what someone said, that's whenever I'm going to use the indirect question. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he asked something like this. That's whenever I'm going to use it's going to, obviously, if it's an indirect question, it's going to have some kind of verb that's asking a question, like input in this case. So you're going to have a verb of asking, and then you're going to have somebody repeating a question that a third party asked before. So in this case, we have the question that was originally asked was, what did you do? And so I'm repeating that question to someone else. He asked what you did. And again, here I have my tense issues. I have a present tense and I have a pluperfect tense. Those don't go together. Those don't match. What I actually have is a perfect tense. Because if I go back to my sequence of tenses, remember, if I think that input is present, there's no way to make the sequence of tense works. However, if I say it's perfect, now I can use my pluperfect subjunctive. So when you get into these situations where you're not sure if something is perfect or imperfect because the forms look the same, inquit and inquit, they're really, they look the same. The perfect and the present look the same. The sequence of tense in this case can help you figure out that this is perfect tense. That's why we have he asked and a paraphrase question, what you did. Now, what you had done would be just as good. Probably a better translation of that, what you had done. This indirect question is kind of the gossip use of the subjunctive. You're repeating what somebody else said, but you're not repeating it word for word. So you can add or subtract a little bit to help your own cause if you want to, if you're repeating what somebody asked. So that's the indirect question. So two ways that we can use it. Cum clause, which is either a temporal or a causal relationship with the main clause, or the indirect question, which is just a summary of a question that was already asked by a third party. Okay, here we go. Here are some practice sentences for you. I want you to take your time, push pause, take your time, translate a couple of these, and we'll go over it. So hit pause now and try to rip through these 4 sentences. Okay, with these 4 sentences, what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight my subjunctives to make sure I can recognize them. I have a cum clause here, so here's a subjunctive. It's pluperfect subjunctive. All right. Effecta esset. Again, I have an infinitive, essa. That's still pluperfect subjunctive. Esses. That is a present infinitive plus a personal ending. Even though that looks just like this one right here, this right here is actually it's not a pluperfect subjunctive because it has a present infinitive in it. That's actually a imperfect subjunctive. And then this one right here, of course, we have as a pluperfect subjunctive. Translating these guys. Okay, with my cum clause, I like to translate it by itself. So I'm going to hold it for later. So all of these cum clauses, I'm going to wait until I've translated the other half of the sentence before I get into it, because I really need that in order to make sure that I have that I'm using the right tense with the subjunctive. So what am I going to end up with here? If I can get the right tool here. I'm going to want to use one. I'll use this one. Oh, I missed a subjunctive, didn't I? Got to use this guy here. That's the pluperfect subjunctive as well. I come here, I get my main verb, which is dismissive, and then I have discipulos. So I know that that someone is dismissing the students. So he dismissed the students. That is perfect tense. So these guys are going to be translated in the pluperfect tense. I know that because my sequence of tense says that the pluperfect subjunctive happens before the main verb. The main verb here is dismissive. So it happens before it. My translation, therefore, is going to be, I always start cum clauses with when. I change them after I get through the sentence to because or before, whatever the context requires. We have an accusative time here, so for many hours, subject, the teacher, had taught and explained. Multa is a substantive, many things. So when the teacher had taught and had explained many things, for many hours is going to have to go with the because it's not going to make sense at the end, so that's where I'm going to put it. When the teacher had taught for many hours and explained many things, he dismissed the students. This next guy right here, again, I have a pluperfect subjunctive. I'm going to go to this second half of the sentence first. I have the subject, the emperor, closed is my verb. The temple is my direct object. Genitive, the temple of Janus. So the emperor closed the temple of Janus. That is perfect tense. That tells me that my pluperfect has to be translated in the pluperfect tense because it has to happen before the main verb. So when the piece happened, it has to be had happened. When the piece had happened, the emperor closed the temple of Janus. When the piece, that's my subject, had happened, the emperor closed the temple of Janus. Again, pluperfect subjunctive happens before the main verb does. Over here, I'm going to leave that cum clause alone. The next one, I'm going to leave the cum clause alone for right now. I'm going to get to the main one, to the main verb, the main clause. I get isti here. It tells me that it's going to be in the perfect tense. You read, and then I have hic modifying librum. You read this book. This is perfect. This right here is not. We said it was not a pluperfect subjunctive because it has a present infinitive plus s. This is a imperfect subjunctive. This has to happen at the same time or after this one. This is perfect tense. So if you think about my timeline for tenses, this could be translated as imperfect. This could be translated as present. It could be translated as future. So in this case, when you were in school, you read this book. Same time works. After doesn't. When you will be in school, you read this book. No, that doesn't work. It has to have the same time. When you were in school, you read this book. So in this case, it's the same time as the main verb. Same time. The others that we've had is before, as is the next one. Okay. Leaving that cum clause alone. Wait a second real quick. Leave this cum clause alone. I have suddenly as an adverb. I have maxima, adjective modifying storm. And then I have corta est, which is arose, if you didn't have that. So suddenly, a great storm arose. Perfect tense means that this guy over here has to be translated in the pluperfect tense because it has to happen before the main verb. So I get to the cum clause. I get another accusative of time here. So for 4 days, when we, Moose, had sailed, had sailed Pluperfect for 4 days. Suddenly a great storm arose. All right. Here are the answers to those that you just had. Hopefully, hopefully I helped you out a little bit. If you have any questions, you can ask me in class or text or call me. Good luck.